Okay, good morning, Dad.
Good morning.
Today is Wednesday, October 15th, and I was thinking maybe we could talk a little bit more about Qatar because you brought this up on Monday saying that there was some kind of something fishing going on between Qatar and Israel. Do you think that there's something really here that we should be diving into this story? Is it significant? I mean,
I,
and if
I
so,
think it's
why?
potentially, yeah, well, okay. I raised the question again of complicity between Qatar and Israel and the United States uh, when uh, when the Hamas negotiating team was attacked in Qatar. And again, there were some reports that came out at the time that suggested that, and there was a Wall Street Journal article that said directly it had been approved ahead of time by Qatar, and in general that hasn't been followed up. People have ignored that possibility, but I think it's a real possibility, and I think we should look at it. Again, it seems very bizarre, but I had been reading earlier that like Qatar was putting increasing pressure on Hamas and was displeased with Hamas. They had had pretty close ties with them. Um, and that certainly is a way to put pressure on them, is to let the Israelis attack their negotiating team and let them know that, oh, it may happen again, you don't really have a safe haven anywhere, in the Middle East. Um, so I think it's something that we have to consider a possibility. It seems very bizarre, but we've seen this. There's a lot of kind of this double dealing within the Middle East among certain governments. The Persian Gulf states, where on the one hand they're condemning the the genocide and using the term, actually using that word genocide, um, that has taken place in Gaza, and then on the other hand they're actually dealing with Israel secretly, out of sight of the public. And that was another report that came out recently from the Washington Post, is that there were even back in 2024, after October 7th, there was a high level meeting between Israel and Qatar at the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, discussing the security relationship. So, hey, what's going on here? And then you have to think, okay, well, it's not just these Persian Gulf states and Israel, whatever. The U.S. has done the same thing. What did we do in Syria? Again, Al Qaeda is supposed to be our number one enemy, and yet we were indirectly supporting them. And Israel was actually directly at one point supporting them, treating their wounded soldiers so they could go back out on the battlefield. So there is a lot of this that takes place there. I don't always understand it, but it happens.
Do you think that the significance of this is that where we're seeing that is lines are being kind of drawn for a potential larger Middle East conflict? Because often when we think about what might happen, we say, oh, Iran versus Israel. But maybe what we're looking at, if we see the actions of countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia, is that it will be a larger war where we know that actually Qatar is just an asset of the United States and Israel. And so that they may be working in cahoots for a pivot to Iran, because Qatar, as you said, they support Sunni extremists. This seems to be the old natural enemy of Iran, of the Shiites, right? So, I mean, is that potentially what you think we're looking at? That's what this signifies, that
Yeah,
relation
that's
is
it.
solid. So it's like,
I think that's certainly a possibility. I'm sure that Israel and the U.S. are courting these powers. They understand, they've kind of lost some influence with them recently. There was, of course, the burying of the hatchet between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which was it was a momentous occasion. They had been mortal enemies, and that really changed the whole geopolitical landscape of the Middle East, and in Iran's favor and against that of Israel and the U.S. So, after that happened, a lot of these Arab states that had been adamantly opposed to Iran, had been very hostile to Iran, follow the Saudi Arabian lead and have set aside that hostile rhetoric and have begun to engage Iran diplomatically to varying degrees. Um, but but Israel and the U.S. I'm sure, want to bring them back in, and they'll use whatever they can to bring them back in to, draw them. Because I think, like you say, again, there still is a target, placed on Iran. I think there's no question about it that there are plans. I don't know that it'll ever happen or when it will happen. But they clearly, people like Netanyahu and many in the U.S. government do want to attack Iran and carry out regime change, or at least, create chaos there to seriously weaken Iran. And they would, they very much want to have these Arab states, especially the Persian Gulf states, on their side.
Right. I think we don't want to underestimate how deep the ties between the United States and some of these Gulf monarchies are, and by extension, Israel. Then, just because for Qatar, I think is actually a unique example because it's a very small population with a lot of natural gas. I think 90% of its population is expats. So you have a very small population that has a lot of wealth, a lot of influence, I forget my train of thought. I was going to say with it, but yeah, basically that they have this, they decided to tie the horse to the United States, to the United States MIC. And maybe that seemed like a good relationship 20, 30 years ago. It made sense. But over those 20, 30 years, we're talking about tons and tons of money that's been going through a small population, a country like Qatar. And I was just kind of diving into that, because you mentioned that Qatar is having an air base in Idaho. It's actually more of a training facility. One other country has this relationship as well. It's Singapore. And I think Germany had one in New Mexico that they trained at up until 2019. But as far as I know right now, it's only Singapore and Qatar. And you wonder, how do they have this special relationship? These are two very small countries, with very high GDPs, small populations, and they have this special relationship status with the United States. And what they do is they buy these very high-end boutique weapons from the United States. And we kind of just wonder, I asked on Monday, just how do we spend $1 trillion and we don't even have a rare earths? What is this? Well, countries like Singapore and Qatar seem to be kind of almost like a money laundering country for the MIC. They establish this relationship with the country, and then they say, we had that $1.2 trillion investment, Qatar is saying. A lot of that is into the MIC. And I was just looking at some of the price tags for the MIC. For example, the F-35 Lightning II Joint Strike Fighter, that program was cost $1.7 trillion for the lifetime. The lifetime is typically 30 to 50 years for a program. And then the Patriot system we talked, it's over $1 billion per battery, $3 to $5 million per interceptor. But then even it goes beyond that. So much of the expense for the MIC is services, things that we don't even think about, just building facilities and maintaining them, upgrade logistics, intelligence, and something that these countries engage in are these bespoke services, like pay an extra $2.7 billion to get Rolls-Royce jet engines, just things that aren't actually practical. It's almost like it's just high-end playground almost for these guys to come and fly their multi-million-dollar aircraft at this airbase. And so I think that's what it is they just have such a lucrative system that has been built up there's just so much money just pumping through it, but it is kind of just money laundering. It's just bespoke. That's what our MIC, I've realized, is. We make super high-end, fancy, and we only make 10, and that makes it exclusive. And then Qatar, this nation can buy one, Singapore one, and UK curry special favors and privileges to the United States. That seems like what it is. Do you think that's right?
Yeah, well, as we've often said, the whole procurement system here in the U.S. over the years has become really a personal enrichment system. I mean, it's just a way for a lot of people to line their pockets. And those high-end, very expensive, not very practical kind of weapons do serve a purpose. Maybe they're not going to help you to win a war of attrition with Russia. They won't. But they will make you rich, if you have the right connections.
And I think the same thing, influence and wealth. That's what.
Yeah, and the same thing goes for Qatar. At the royal family there, the emir's family, which runs the country, they get a cut of all that. So, the more expensive, the better from their point of view. In a way, they get their share of the action. And I just wanted to mention when I said it was an air base. That's how it was reported in some places. It was what Hegseth said is that we're going to build an Air Force facility at Mountain Home Air Base or in Idaho, or and it's not exactly. I think that we're going to build what he didn't do is explain that it was for training, because it almost did sound like he was giving up at least a part of that air base to Qatar, and that's not exactly what it is. But it's supposed to be for training F-15 pilots. That's the purpose. But it still shows right there, the closeness of the relationship. I think it's the news is equally significant, or nearly so. It's just that there is a very, very tight relationship between Qatar and the U.S. and it goes back. It didn't begin with Trump. Obviously it's been there for a long time, and then I think it has a lot of it has to do with money and connections to Israel. Again, here, very strange. This is the supporters of Hamas, but all along there have been these connections to Israel. And again, there was the scandal. Israel's discovered a lot of Netanyahu's associates had personal dealings with individuals in Qatar.
Right. I mean, it makes sense that Qatar is a prime object for that, because the whole country is so wealthy. I think it's easy. You're able to corrupt the whole country with that much money. Everybody gets a Bugatti. Everybody gets whatever. We're talking about trillions of dollars.
Right. Exactly.
And it's such a key piece. So I think a lot of people, I mean, I didn't really know much about Qatar, and I'm just kind of just last night I was talking to GPT about the prices of these equipments in Qatar. I was like, wait, is this what's going on? That it is kind of just an MIC outpost and laundering scheme and way to buy influence.
Yeah, I wouldn't say exactly not exactly laundering, but it's just sort of an extension of that corrupt system. That lines the pockets of so many people that and doesn't. Right. I think it's like the military purpose is almost secondary. That's my feeling about it.
Right. Yeah. That's what I feel as well. Right. It's about the money and the influence, and the equipment. It's just something fun for them to show around. It's not really going to work in a real war.
Right.
The maintenance costs are insane. Just to maintain these things. And anyways, go on.
Yeah. I mentioned, again, there was that war between that Saudi Arabia and Yemen that went on for something like 8 years. And Saudi Arabia is so much more wealthy, of course, than Yemen is. And they've been buying these very expensive weapons from the U.S. for decades, right? And you would think there's no contest, but it was. In the end, the Saudi Arabians had to admit that they actually couldn't defeat the Houthis. Again, these very, very poor people. And it turned out that they really didn't even, all those fancy toys didn't do much good. They didn't really have a very well trained, for one thing, army, or they didn't have the military personnel to run them. And the U.S. actually intervened and helped a lot with, for example, the bombing raids. Coordinated and provided the services and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think it's mostly show, and it's all about corruption, just lining pockets on both sides of the globe here.
Right. I mean, I'm still a little surprised, but I guess these relationships, they go back a long ways, and a lot. I'm sure there's other things. Probably there's blackmail and other things that are keeping them together. But because I think now a lot of people will start thinking of countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and a lot of people already are, as just kind of sellout countries. And because, if Israel bombed your country and the United States allowed it to happen, then, the more right thing to do is say, okay, we're kicking out your air base. We have sovereignty. And, 20, 30 years ago, I understand why you felt like you had to stick with the United States, because it seemed like it was the only player in town. That's where you had to hitch your wagon. It was the only thing that we thought was had a superiority in all these weapon systems. Yeah. But that's not true anymore. China and Russia are showing themselves to be superior in so many of these weapon systems, and at just a fraction of the price. The amount that China cranks out, and they spend, I think, less than 5% of what we spent on our military budget. So it just seems like technically you should be able to switch camps, but they won't. Well, why is it? Do you think it simply just comes down to just the amount of money, or is there something else? Is there this blackmail, or are they being promised something that, like, look, don't worry, we got this big plan. We're gonna blow up the Middle East, and you guys are gonna be kings of it. It's like,
Yeah, well, I think it's mostly just a personal interest. Again, the emir and his family, and again, it's just this ruling caste. It's like you say, it's a relatively small percentage of the population, and we're talking about a fairly small population. So everybody, has an interest in these arrangements. Everybody is richer for them. I think that's a sufficient explanation. I mean, that this is a corrupt ruling family, and they're not really concerned about causes like the Palestinian statehood or anything like that. It's just about maintaining their wealth and influence, and they find that their relationship with the U.S. is still very helpful in that way. And they may think the Chinese are stingier and less willing to pay the bribes, or that their weapons are cheaper, which you would think would be a big advantage, but it's just like, oh, then I get a smaller cut. I don't know exactly what they're thinking, but I suspect it's something along those lines.
well, you think that's got to be a pretty short-sighted view, right? Because if you are looking at potentially, we were saying potentially, if a war breaks out and where the line's going to be drawn, if Qatar and Saudi Arabia end up showing themselves on the Israeli camp, they're going to have revolts on their side, or if the Jordanians or the Egyptians as well. We know that they're bought off as well. It's
Right.
like it will end badly for them at some point in time,
Yeah,
right?
I hope so. They've been in power for a long time.
But things are changing now. Just
Yeah,
the
of course. Well,
sentiment.
like I should qualify that. Like in the case of Egypt, there was the Arab Spring that did overthrow the corrupt government, and there was an interval in which they had a popularly elected president who actually came from the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. But the same old forces came back, and we were back to where we were, and Egypt continues to have this cozy relationship. But I think all of them are aware of the dangers, and that's why you get heated rhetoric from them, from everybody, from Erdogan to Al-Sisi and the Emir of Qatar, whatever. They sound like the Iranians when they're denouncing, the genocide in Gaza, but meanwhile, the cozy relationship, the economic relationship continues. That's obviously what really matters to them, and then the rest of it is just rhetoric to keep their own population at bay and bamboozled.
Yeah, I guess what I'm afraid of is that we have this peace agreement, and I know Israel's already done some airstrikes, violated, which is something you said was likely to happen. Say that we have a ceasefire, but there'll be constant violations from the Israeli side. So maybe that's what will happen for a while, and then. But I almost feel like maybe there's a chance that instead of just going back into Gaza, because we said that will be difficult domestically for Netanyahu, just for the whole world to stomach again, the longer you wait to build up that momentum to say, oh boy, let's start killing civilians again. It's not, I just don't see them getting away with it. But instead, maybe there's just a pivot to start a larger war, against Iran, which would involve countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia, and who knows, Jordan. But I feel like if they do that, we'll see popular uprisings and revolts, in these countries.
Yeah. Well, yeah, if I remember correctly, during the 12-day war, the Persian Gulf states denied their airspace to Israel. And
But
maybe
Israel's
that'll be
still
different.
flying. How did they get there?
They can fly
denied it.
across Iraq and Syria now. It's actually but it does reduce their scope of maneuver. It does have an effect. I don't think it's all really vital to them. Yeah. But anyway, let's see. What was I about to say? That, yeah, no, I think your point is true. First of all, I just want to comment again on how it is going to be difficult for Netanyahu to start this up again. I am struck. I've been reading a lot of articles in Haaretz, and there's just a sense of finality. Like, this time the war is over. It's just stated as, declarative sentence. The war is over, and that's what these reporters are saying. That's what these politicians are saying, and that's new, because I remember the ceasefire back at the beginning of the year. There was a sense that this might not last. That this was just, a very, very tenuous. It's just what it might not hold. But this time there's this sense of finality. It's over. It's just simply over. And that's, again, that's Donald Trump came and he said that. And so I think in the, at least in the short run and maybe the medium term as well, it's going to be very hard for Israel to start it up again. But of course, we've talked about the other pressures, and I think in Netanyahu's own motivations, he'll want to. But I think again, it's going to be hard, but what's the alternative? And, again, another war, a war with Iran. So somewhere down the road, I think we'll see that. It's nothing certain, but the pressures to do that are there. The motivations are obvious. And then in the meantime, I think what we're going to have is something like Lebanon, where we have technically a ceasefire, but Israel will violate it every day. That's what they're doing already. They're already, they've used the excuse of Hamas's failure to find, the remains of the dead hostages, to reduce the flow of humanitarian aid, to shut down the Rafah border crossing, and they're still killing people, just at a lower rate. They're just, instead of dozens of people every day, it's maybe, 5 or 10 or something, but they'll continue to do that. And I think that's what we're going to see for the foreseeable future.
Would you expect some type of war with Iran to happen sooner rather than later? Some type of conflict, or going back into Gaza? Because of this, it's just like you said, if they're putting on this note of finality, like it's over, once it all just sort of calms down and, the bloodlust goes down, people are just going to be like, what the hell was that, Israel? How, what? Isn't there there's got to be something, some type of repercussions for this behavior, right? That was a big no-no. You really went overboard, right? We watched this.
Right. I would hope so. Unfortunately, we have a media that is very, very friendly to Israel and, complicit in its crimes, and they'll do what they can to spin it. That's what they're already doing. They're describing this as a great victory for Israel, and that, that they're cheering the return of the hostages. And again, absolutely no interest in the many, many more hostages really on the Palestinian side. And there'll be, as we've seen, there's no shame in our mainstream media. They'll do what they can to hide what's happened. But I think you're right. It's like as time goes by, and certainly more people get into Gaza, and a real accounting takes place, and the bodies are removed from under the rubble and so on, we'll begin to get a sense of a more accurate sense of the full extent of the horror that took place there. And it again, the mainstream media and Western governments, they'll do what they can to ignore that, but they can't hide it completely, and it will come out and it will create pressure. And I think within Israel, they often, that there is going to be a lot of questioning. Right now, there's a sort of a euphoria there. But when the dust settles, they say, what was that all about? And they say, now I go on vacation and I can't go to Europe, because somebody's going to spit on me, or I've got to pretend to be, anybody but an Israeli. There's something, we paid a huge cost for this. And what did we achieve? Again, it's just because I think most people in Israel know, like, this deal that was done could have been easily done a year, if not earlier, even, even 18 months earlier. It's just, there was no reason for the war to go on as it did. I mean, these plans, they were in the air. These proposals were there, but Netanyahu clearly was not interested in them. He wanted to go ahead with the ethnic cleansing. And of course, there are people who are mad that he has put the ethnic cleansing on hold. That's what's happening in Israel. But we'll see. It's going to, we'll see if the extremists win out here and they get their ethnic cleansing again. I think they will eventually. It's not that the majority is opposed to it. It's just that they're tired of it and, they want to take a rest. But if there's some excuse that can be fabricated somewhere down the road, I think it will start up again.
Right. But right, as that pressure builds, as you said, both domestically and internationally, people are just like, well, what was that all about? They really, I don't understand how they can expect to ever be treated as a normal country ever again after this. And I think maybe the only thing that they got is to say, well, we'll just go all out war and then everybody will kind of forget about it. And as long as we come out on top, we get to write history. That might be the mindset. I mean, just think about it. From now on, whenever Israel does any type of sporting event, any type of international competition, they're going to be booed, and just people are just going to do whatever they can to beat them. It's just like it's going to be like that. I think forever. I don't understand. They've done irreparable damage to them. They'll be hated forever.
Yeah, maybe the intensity of it will subside gradually over time, but it's gonna be there. I mean, that's a black mark is not gonna can't be washed off.
Right. Okay. Something else I was just thinking about. I was just thinking about our leaders, people we'll just take Trump for example. Do they think he's aware of what people think about him and his choices that he makes when he does these tariffs or his refusal to release the Epstein files, bombing Iran, clearly doing things that are in the interest of Israel instead of the United States? He has to get that. Or do you think that they have, the people around him that could control him or have his ear have done a good enough job? They basically Truman showed it for him to create this fake reality with them. And in a way, it's easier to control Trump, first of all, because he's very susceptible to flattery as in his narcissism, but he has his own social media platform, Truth Social. So okay, if that's where he's getting his news, where does he get it? He gets it Fox News in his own platform. We fill those two things up with just whatever we want him to hear. A pro-Zionist things that how you're so great and everybody loves Israel, and he actually thinks that. Or do you think he is aware of what people are, or the sentiment that's growing up and just the grassroots here in the United States? People are like, we don't like what you're doing with putting Israel first. Do you think he's really aware of all this?
I think he must be aware of it to a certain extent. I mean, that's one reason he became elected, is that he did have, an appreciation of what common people thought, and that's, much more so than a lot of the other Republican and, Democratic candidates. But now he's president. He is surrounded by these people. And I think, you talk about the bubble that he's in, but I think it's true to a great extent of the entire, ruling class, the political class and throughout the West. They live within their bubble. And that's why we often see this real disconnect. They're doing these things that are quite unpopular. And, again, in these Western European leaders, the main ones are well below 20%. Trump's actually doing better than they are, rather. But his approval ratings are actually very low too, by historical standards. But I think it's all a reflection of this, let's say, this growing gap between the political class and average people. They just don't really have any sense of their concerns. They don't have connections with these people anymore. And they are always reassuring themselves, so this is what you got to do. This is the right thing, and, within the people that they talk to every day, it just seems obvious that what Keir Starmer, or what Chancellor Merz, what we're doing is correct, because everybody around me is telling me that it's correct. And they do hear about these opinion polls and say, well, these are obviously ignorant masses and we need to educate them, and in time they'll get it. I think there's some of that all around. But he must be to some extent, Trump, he must be to some extent aware of it. But there are these countervailing forces. There's a lot of money behind, and maybe blackmail. I think that's certainly a possibility. And he just decides that the money and the blackmail are more important. By the way, that just reminds me of what happened when he gave that speech to the Knesset in Israel. he pointed out Miriam Adelson, his number one donor, the widow of Sheldon Adelson. And it was just like, I think a lot of people were saying, shut up, you're not supposed to say these things out loud. But he was saying that she and her late husband were the most frequent visitors to the White House. And it was like from them that he learned about the Golan Heights and the importance of that. The U.S. went ahead and recognized the Golan Heights. So you're just telling us, that it was this one. And he also just talked about the sense of entitlement that Sheldon Adelson has. Like, it's just, you would even talk down to the president or just insist on showing up even when it wasn't convenient for President Trump. He say, hey, Sheldon, I'm the president. He thought it was all very funny and he was talking about it. Then at the end, he kept on pointing to Miriam Adelson there in the audience. And then he said, once I asked her, like, who are you more devoted to, the U.S. or Israel? And she didn't give an answer, but I think we know. And clearly he was implying it was Israel. Yeah. And it was just, it was all these things that, so-called, anti-Semites, come up with. But there it was just, being broadcast spoken out loud. I think a lot of people, were probably really, made very, very nervous by these contents. You're not supposed to be that open about it, but he was. That's the one, I think maybe if you want to say that talk about the real achievements of the Trump administration, it is actually bringing these things to light.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like really the root of all this problem is the fiat money system. Like, I don't feel like any of this stuff, a $1 trillion budget for the military-industrial complex and just this rampant corruption everywhere, starting all these wars. It's all because of the fiat money system, right? It's when we completely got off the gold standard. It allowed us to do this, and then now it's just like we just have a printing press and we just buy up everybody, and it's just all debt. Like, I saw somewhere that said that like the world has a total of $337 trillion of debt. And I was like, who do we owe that money to? Who owes what? Like, how does that even work? It's just like just an imaginary system. And we just, us everyday people just suffer through inflation through it is all it is. It's just these people can just buy off whoever they want. It's this ruling class because we have this printing press and we just, try to maintain control over it with our, through our military or just these really corrupt deals that we have with people. But it can't last that much longer, right? I mean, how does this work?
Well, I think, that's probably like the whole question of the fiat money system is probably beyond the scope of this podcast. I mean, that's a whole, I think that's that would deserve many, many episodes to discuss it in depth. But I would say just in general that, it does make possible these huge debts and these, the bloated Pentagon budget. I think there's no question about that. If there was, let's say, if our money was real and that, that if every penny of it had to be accounted for, then it would be very hard to justify, these huge ticket items. I think there's no question about it because you would have to go to the voters and say, we want to produce so many more weapons and start so many more wars. It's going to cost you about an extra $10,000 a year per family. Is that okay? And the answer obviously is going to be no. But with the current system, you can just do it, and then you indirectly tax those people through inflation, right? And that's what we have happening. But I would say that I think the mega donor problem is not so much linked to that. Maybe you can make an argument that it was, but there can be very wealthy people in a different system. Let's say if the dollar was based on, it still had the gold standard, you're going to have phenomenally wealthy people for one reason or another who can influence government.
Yeah, but I think those phenomenally wealthy people can get even more phenomenally wealthy because of how they're able to lobby the government, get their special carve-outs and bills or whatever it is, have, foreknowledge of events to make tons of money on the stock market. It's clearly I think if that is a big part of the problem, and the fiat money system is it's an anomaly. That's what we're living through right now. So it just we like to think, because I grew up the whole time in a fiat system, and the dollar was backed by the faith of the U.S. government. But really, that's not how it's traditionally ever been. I mean, we got off the completely in 1971. It's only been like 54 years, and it's already shown how horrible it's been. You just see how the value of the dollar has crashed by like 98%, since it's done. It's like, okay, well, how long before the whole thing just implodes? And I think that's kind of what we're looking at. We're looking at a lot of different things happening, but the whole engine of the U.S. empire is based on this dollar system. And as that starts to give away, that's kind of what I think we need to hope for to end this empire and go back to, a more fiscally responsible system, which would be a gold standard or something like that, some commodity standard. But yeah, let's don't get into it, because that'll be for a different podcast maybe. Maybe we haven't talked about Russia in a while. Can you maybe update me what's going on there? What's the big news? I mean,
yeah,
the Tomahawks or whatever. But
yeah, well, we'll start with the Tomahawks. I find it very interesting. Again, we've mentioned the technical difficulties involved. It's not clear that there are any way to launch those Tomahawks from Ukraine. There is a possibility. Again, it's not. I've heard conflicting reports. There was some sort of program that the U.S. military started a couple of years ago to develop simpler launchers for the Tomahawks. And then either that is maybe succeeding or is about to bear fruit, or it was called off. I've heard conflicting reports on that. So there may be something that is available soon. There may be a way actually to launch Tomahawks, from Ukraine. I think that's the first thing that we should be aware of. Now, it has caused quite Putin's treatment of this question has sparked a huge controversy, and actually a lot of grumbling and even real anger, both within Russia, within the Russian media, and apparently I think within the Russian leadership and the Russian population, but also within the larger dissident community. I'll give you an example. Yesterday I was listening to the Duran,
and I listened to it too.
Yeah, Alex Cristoforo was, as he usually does, interviewing Alex Makuras, but he spoke a lot more than he usually does, because he was really worked up about it. He was angry in a way that I haven't seen. He
sounded like me with you.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So he was going on and on. It's like, why is Putin, what does he think he's doing? Why doesn't he just speak the truth, et cetera, et cetera. What does he think he's there's obviously no point in trying to appease Trump and these people, and you're also, by his failure by his because of his very soft response to this, he is inviting the crossing of red lines. He's inviting, further attacks on Russia. That's what Alex Cristoforo was saying, and what a lot of people apparently within Russia are saying too. So yeah, it's an interesting question. I guess what I would say is, like, I understand the anger, and I guess I feel some of it too. So I'm not saying that he was wrong. He might very well be right, but I think that we should stop and think about Putin's own position and maybe the intelligence that he has. It's not clear if the Ukrainians actually can launch these. And, maybe they just, I'm sure the Russians really know one way or the other. And maybe the intelligence is that they can't do it. It's not going to happen for at least a year, maybe even longer than that. And Putin knows that. And then Putin also, I think, understands Trump's psychology. And so what we're saying is, like, okay, let's just speak the truth. Just throw down the gauntlet. Let's just tell Trump, okay, if you do this, we're going to strike a base in Romania or maybe even Germany or something with an Oreshnik. Don't do it, man. It's like, that I think that might work with a lot of leaders, but in the case of Trump, it's that's the sort of thing that just might set him off. And you remember what happened, like with when the Chinese, imposed the restrictions on the rare earths. Trump was infuriated, and then he's declared that he's going to slap these 100% tariffs in. And to my knowledge, he still hasn't taken that back, though he may very well. It's just that you don't want to infuriate them when we're talking about not tariffs, but we're talking about missiles flying across the border and a potential for a World War III. And it's just, you don't want to provoke him. I mean, Trump, I think his basic instincts, he doesn't like this war, but he's also shown himself to be very reckless in ways. And, you maybe have this general, preference for a diplomatic solution, but we also see that he can actually, go places that, even the Biden administration wouldn't go. Again, we had the attack on Iran. And I think the Russians are aware of that. Putin's very much aware of that. And he's just thinking, look, I don't think this is ever even going to happen. Why ignite this fire right now? Let's just try to make it go away and let's not talk about it, because it won't happen. Maybe that's the way Putin is looking at it. And I can understand it. Again, it's just like we have to differentiate between, us. We don't actually bear any responsibility. We don't have a whole country on our shoulders, or our comments aren't going to spark World War III or anything. But Putin's comments might. He does have to look at these things. He does have to consider all these possibilities. He can't speak freely. He speaks as the president of Russia, and he must be more cautious. Again, maybe he's making a mistake, and he is inviting further attacks. I understand those arguments, and they may be true. But I think we have to at least allow for the possibility that, he actually is pursuing the correct course of action and avoiding, an unnecessary escalation.
Yeah, I kind of actually am in the same camp as well. Because my understanding is that if we do even send them Tomahawks, it would only be 20 to 50. And, the Tomahawk missile it's subsonic. All of our missiles, we don't have hypersonic missiles. It's rather slow. It does have a long range, but I imagine that this will actually be more damaging to the United States than anything. Just a further sign that, the U.S. MIC is it's just all smoke and mirrors. It's a paper tiger. Their equipment is outdated. We saw what happened with the ATACMS, that how quickly that the Russians were able to build a profile and just basically render it useless. I imagine they'll probably end up doing something soon with the Tomahawk. And it's just like the strategy of slowly piecemealing weapons into Ukraine so that Russia has time to study them, adapt them, and know how to counter them. It's damaging to the U.S. MIC, and it's bolstering, Russia, China, and Iran, because we know they're sharing intelligence, they're sharing information. So, and if you are going to do any attack that gets, any significant number of Tomahawks through, you probably only have one volley that you have. If you're able to even fire that many. From what I heard from Colonel Douglas McGregor, that there's a possibility that they have a simplified tube launch system that they could shoot from barges potentially, but I don't know how many they could have and how many they can shoot at once. We don't have a lot of these missiles, and he doesn't know how many we have, but he knows that it takes a long time to make. They're kind of old. So I just don't think it is going to have much of an impact. It's just going to go, it might do some serious, some damage and grab headlines for a little bit, but it's not going to change the outcome of the war. And then, okay, here's another weapon system that the U.S. has that has now been neutralized. Do you think?
Well, I've heard, the Tomahawk actually first appeared, was put into operation back in the 1980s. It's been around for a long time. And the Russians, back then the Soviet Union, were very much aware of it. And I've heard it said that it actually, Russia's air defense was to a great extent developed with the Tomahawk in mind. It's a weapon they've been studying for a long time. So that may be part of what's going on, is that Putin's technical advisors are telling him, don't worry about this. This is one weapon that we know how to take down. Now, there is always a risk, that nothing's ever 100%, even if you have very, very good air defense and you've got a very good profile on the enemy's weapon. There's occasionally something's going to get through and could do real damage. But I think they feel highly confident that they can shoot down, the great majority of them. I think maybe that's part of the reason for Putin's refusal to get worked up about this.
Right. I mean, I was trying to look at some kind of equivalence of, because the payload that the Tomahawk has isn't even that large. I don't know, is it 300 pounds or I think it's 300 kilos. But like the Kinjal that Russia's been firing into Ukraine, those are hypersonic and they have much larger payloads, and they've been firing a lot of them in there.
Yeah.
So I mean, like what we're sending to Ukraine is just it's a tenth of the speed of the Kinjal with a lower payload. And we know that Russia has better air defense and electronic warfare than the U.S. So I'm sure that one or two will get through, because that happened with the ATACMS in the beginning. A couple get through, but I guess it's easy for us to say, because we're not living in Russia. It's if you had missiles that would hit Moscow and St. Petersburg, that is a major escalation, and it is scary. But I don't think that to me it just proves that the U.S. doesn't have anything. That we can only give. This is our big wonder weapon that we're now touting, is the Tomahawk that he said was developed in the 80s, flies at subsonic speeds, doesn't have that large of a payload. We don't even know if they have the ability to launch them in Ukraine, because they're typically air launched or submarine launched. So yeah, I don't know. It seems like I'm almost just, like I said, it's easy for me to say, just do it, and it'll be a win for Russia, and it's going to be a loss for the U.S. and NATO. That's how I view it, anyways.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe this is a mistake, but I just tend to defer to Putin in his judgments. That he clearly is somebody who knows. He's got the intelligence, and unlike Trump, who is getting his news, or his information from Fox News and maybe the Israelis or whatever, Truth Social, right? Putin clearly is getting a lot of good intelligence, and that he's a very rational person. It doesn't mean that he can't make mistakes, and he's admitted to it. He's made mistakes. He was wrong to put so much faith in the Minsk Accords, for example, and to trust the Western leaders and on that. I understand the anger. I've to a certain extent, I feel it on occasion myself. But I am willing to say, well, let's wait and see. And let's remember too the consequences. Like if you go too far, if you provoke a major escalation, we could all be in a lot of trouble. And it's very important to tread carefully here. I think some people might say, that, well, look at the Chinese. The Chinese didn't have actually been real firm, and they refused to appease the hostile, at least recently. They have refused to appease the U.S. When the U.S. Takes hostile actions against them, they respond in kind. They reciprocate, immediately or in very short order. But the issues there are different. We're talking about an economic war. We're not talking about a real war. And you say, like, for example, they retaliated. The tariffs went up 100% on both sides. But then a couple months later, they were able to bring them back down, and no significant damage was done. But when we're talking about missiles, the missiles start flying, and then it's maybe just too late. It's just like it's a whole different ballgame. And, what might be appropriate when you're dealing with economic issues is not appropriate when you're dealing with military issues.
Right. And what's just so pathetic is that we basically set the rules to say that we're allowed to hit you, but don't you dare hit us back. But even though those are the rules, we're still losing. We're still flailing. It's really pathetic. So I think if that's the case and Putin sees it, it's just like they see it like, okay, fine, just let you completely bankrupt yourself, empty all of your stockpiles, give us, it's a huge boost to Russia's MIC. Like they are being able to develop and at breakneck speeds. And so is China now. They're just like, okay, let's just watch everything that this aggressive country, United States, is throwing at us, piecemealing to us, so we can slowly learn how to adapt to it and counter it and develop better systems. It's just everything is in the advantage of China, Iran, and Russia, and we are just flailing and just getting so mad and just trying to punch people, but we're just hurting our own fists and not hurting them.
Right. Yeah, I think one other thing that like the Tomahawk issue tells us, just the fact that they're being considered now is, it's not a sign of strength on the part of the U.S. and the West. It's actually quite the reverse, that they actually have gone this far to be talking about Tomahawks, which they wouldn't have considered at all, shows the failure of every other system. Why are we here? It's because they are losing and everything else they've thrown at the Russians have failed to have an impact. So now we've actually gone to the point of talking about Tomahawks. It's not something that they would have even been considered, at all, even remotely a couple of years ago. But here we are. And it's because they have run out of options. It's a sign of weakness on the part of the West that they're doing this.
Right. And it seems like, I don't know what else the U.S. has. People always want to say like, oh, we got some super wonder weapons. It's like, I don't know. Do we? I mean, we have like the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, but we've only built 21 of them, and probably less than half of them are operable, and we just never use it. It's just a showcase kind of item that's not actually for a war. And they cost, by the way, $2.13 billion each and $1997. So that means about $5 billion a piece just for that. And I just went through some of these things I was just looking at. Like we built this Zumwalt class destroyer. Each one cost $7.5 billion. And we canceled just after 3 ships. We only built 3 of them. And because the gun system's ineffective. It just shows you just like, what do we have? Just all of these, the Virginia class submarine costs about $4 billion a piece. I just don't get it. It's so clear that we don't have anything left, but we are wanting to escalate slowly and just sort of expose our weakness, both on the economic front and the military front, and then, of course, on the moral front with Gaza. It's just all gone. I mean, I think, I don't know which one's more damaging. They're all so damaging. Like we talked about these, like the 3 billion pillars that support U.S. hegemony, is that moral pillar, the idea that we are somehow righteous people and liberal democracy is a great thing and we have the right system and freedom and all this, and then the military, and then our economic might. But China has wiped out our economic might. Gaza has destroyed any sense of moral superiority. And I think Russia has just crushed the idea that the U.S. has good weapon systems. So it just, there it is. It's over. It disappeared in like 3 years. That whole thing just disappeared. 2 years. I think and right now we're just running on faith and belief. But just a matter of time before the rest of the world wakes up. That's pretty powerful,
though. But it's amazing. Sometimes, I think that what you said is basically true. But but there are a lot of people who still are living, in, let's say, the 1990s within this country, as far as their consciousness goes, their awareness goes. And none of those things have gone through. For them, those 3 pillars are just as firm as ever. And unfortunately, that seems to be true in general of the people that rule over us, the political class. That's part of, I think it's just part of their identity is that, hey, we're number one. And, if you're saying something else, obviously you're working for the enemy. I think, again, there's sort of it makes me think of the fall of the Qing dynasty, when clearly it became the Western powers, had superior technology and superior militaries, but there was it was very, very hard for the Qing to recognize this, because it was just something so ingrained that, we are the Middle Kingdom, we are the greatest civilization on earth. And, these foreigners, they have their little toys, but in the end, Eventually that fell, obviously it did, they only became, the ruling class only became woke up to the fact when it was too late. And then the dynasty fell. And
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely already too late, but I think it's a little bit different now. Well, for a couple reasons. One, I think, is we have social media, so the ability to see things for the masses to understand and see things, the average person, not just the ruling elite. But the other part is I think the moral pillar. I think that will shake people's faith more than anything, because there's this, you want to believe that the U.S. is the best. And maybe in the 90s and the 80s, it was a lot easier to believe it because it's just like, oh, we got all the best stuff. It's so great. And where everybody loves America and everybody wants to be part of America. That's the case. But what happened, I think, from Gaza, people don't want to be part of America. They don't want America to be all powerful. They don't want the U.S. to be the U.S. hegemon, including people in this country. We don't like it anymore. And I think that itself is causing that faith, that belief that we're just number one. People will turn away from it more rapidly. At least the average everyday citizens. Like, now we lost the right to have this type of power a long time ago. I think that's what a lot of people are coming to, and I think that's why it's different. All of these, the moral thing from Gaza, the economic war with China, the direct kinetic conflict with Russia, all of these are destroying the U.S. empire in different ways, very unique. And the Qing dynasty didn't have the exact same setup.
Oh no, it's
like, yeah, right. I know.
Yeah, it's a very. I think it's in. I don't want to make too much of it because they are very different situations, but there's some aspects that are analogous. And
I think with the ruling class, right?
Yeah.
I think it is interesting, but yeah, I think we're just living through such a unique time where all these three pillars are just being knocked out from under us. So I just think the collapse will be a lot faster than we expect. Would you agree, or do you think that?
Well, I think there's a real chance of it. Yeah. I think you're right. And again, it's I don't want to make any predictions about time, but it kind of reminds me again to draw another analogy is just to economic bubbles in the past. You see these bubbles, and certain people, clear-sighted economic analysts will say, "Wait a second, this is a bubble. This can't last." And others, will refuse to say, no, this is real. This is going to go on forever. And in the end, the clear-eyed analysts are always proved correct. The bubble pops. But the question is when. And there are a lot of people who can make a lot of money in the in the meantime. It can go on for years longer than you think. But then it does pop. And I would say it's the same thing. I'm not going to make any prediction about when it's going to happen, but I think it just has to collapse. I think there's no question. It's just that's where we're headed. But will it be next year that it collapses, or will it be 10 years from now? I don't know.
Well, the way we're behaving, it could be in a couple of months. Who knows? I mean, well,
not impossible.
Well, I think what will cause the collapse will actually, out of these three pillars, I think it'll be the one that China's chopping down, the economic one. Trump deciding to engage in this trade war with China might have been the dumbest thing that we've ever seen. Yeah. And we'll see, like we said, with these rare earths, China's not going to capitulate. They said they're willing to fight this all the way, whatever it takes. We're not playing this game. We're going to do. You can't tell us what to do anymore. And Trump's response to that is just to flail around more, and it's just damaging the U.S. just so much. I mean, like if China doesn't move these export restrictions on rare earths, we're in big trouble. I don't know what we're going to do. It just because not only our MIC is dead in the water, but so much of our tech sector, including AI, which makes up something like 17% of current investment in this country, or something insane.
Yeah, I've heard 40% of recent economic growth, something like that.
Right. That's it. If they cut that off and we're not able to expand that sector, or it just takes a huge hit because we are not able to get the rare earths to, make whatever it is that we need for it, it's game over. I just can't believe we engaged in this economic warfare with China when they have all the cards, So it's just...
it's absurd. I mean, Yeah, it has to be one of the stupidest truths that that Trump has ever issued. I mean, and there's a lot of competition for that right there. The competition is very severe because he's issued a lot of stupid ones over the time. Because he issues them every day. But this had to be the stupidest because can't even remember. It was just a couple months ago that he had threatened the 100%, and then I think panicked and realized, and we had the Alaska summit, right, to get out of it. Basically, I think that was what motivated that. Did he forget? Did he forget what happened back in the spring? What foolishness! And then I think already he's regretting and is all nervous once again. I think immediately his advisors came to him and said, "Hey, remember, we can't do this. We don't have the leverage, on them. They have the leverage here. Remember what we were telling you, what we agreed." And so then we got that really silly post where it's like, oh, she just had a bad day or something. And but still, yeah, right. Yeah. But anyway, still he's stuck with it. He made it, he declared that this was going to happen, I guess in November, and we'll see. I think there's a good chance he'll have to wriggle out of it, but it will be a humiliating, whatever he does is going to be humiliating to him personally and to the U.S.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think he panicked because of the rare earth exports. That happened about 5 days before it, and then he realized, the Pentagon probably told him we can't make diddly squat without China, so this is a big no-no. And I saw an article that right now, because I guess the rare earth exports go into effect on November 1st as well, the Pentagon is just trying to stockpile as much as they can right now, just buy everything they can before it goes into effect. Which I'm kind of surprised China was even allowing to do that. Be like, no, you can't. So, but it's, we'll see what happens. But I think, I don't know if we'll be able to, we can capitulate, but I don't think China will change its stance on that export restriction. So I don't think it may not matter what we do. We might just be, just out of luck. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll see. Is there anything else you want to cover?
Well, that's enough. I think we probably should talk more about Russia, the next time. We need the things are happening there more than Tomahawk talk. So we need to get back to the front lines and the missile war. And there's quite a lot of interesting things happening, but we can do that next time.
Okay. Well, if probably won't, because we'll probably be at war with Venezuela, and we'll talk about that. But
okay.
If not, then actually, I don't know. We'll see what happens. I checked the market. The odds have gone up for the end of the month. It was 22% for military intervention. I think when we talked about it 10 days ago or 2 weeks ago. Now it's at 33% for the end of the month. So that's only 15 days left. So we'll see.
Right.
Okay. Anyways, I guess we'll end it there then, Dad.
All right.
Okay.
Very good.
Have a good rest of your day. I'll talk to you
too.
soon. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.